Great. All right, so now it's my honor to introduce our featured author this evening. Dr. Mark Rubinstein is a Wilton resident, psychiatrist, great friend to the library, and an accomplished author of 12 novels and 5 medical self-help books. Mad Doghouse, his first novel, was named a finalist for the 2012 Forward Review's Book of the Year for thriller and suspense. And The Foot Soldier won the Silver Award for Fiction at the 2014 Benjamin Franklin Awards. His latest book, Downfall, has been getting rave reviews. Jonathan Kellerman, New York Times bestselling author, says, Downfall is a compelling psychological thriller enriched with a superb sense of time and place, a page-turner that doesn't sacrifice depth of understanding of the human condition. Thank you to Eve from Elm Street Books for selling copies of Downfall this evening, and a portion of the proceeds will go to the library. So now please join me in welcoming Mark Rubinstein.
First off, I want to thank Carolyn Mandler and Susan Varelli for inviting me to speak here tonight. So let's talk a little bit about mysteries and thrillers, okay? I've often been asked if mysteries and thrillers are the same thing. Well, they definitely are not. While thrillers may have significant elements of mystery in them, they are definitely a different order of novel, a completely different animal. So let's define each of them. A mystery involves a puzzle crying out to be solved. The protagonist must solve the mystery of who committed a murder or some other heinous act. Rarely is the protagonist's life in danger, although that may occasionally occur. A mystery's pace may be slow, even languorous, but eventually, with some hints dropped by the author, the puzzle will be solved. Agatha Christie's novels are typical mysteries. They are classical whodunits. In the process of solving the crime, there's often an exploration of the perpetrator's motivation. By the way, there are closed mysteries and open mysteries. A closed mystery is one in which the investigating detective and the reader don't know who the perpetrator is. An open mystery can be much more interesting in that the perpetrator is known to the reader, but not to the investigating officer or detective. A thriller, on the other hand, is a very different book from a mystery. It involves a threat to the life and well-being of the protagonist, of the community, or even of the nation. In addition to there being a protagonist, there's a well-defined antagonist. The antagonist can be a person, a nation, or even something as strange as the protagonist's conscience, which arguably occurs in Hamlet. Jeffrey Deaver, Harlan Coben, and James Patterson write typical thrillers with a variety of antagonists. Catastrophe will occur if the protagonist doesn't act decisively and, if necessary, with violence. There's a crushing urgency in a thriller that's usually not present in a mystery. The stakes are extremely high, and the urgency is either actual or in a psychological sense. But in any event, there's a crushing need, an urgency for the protagonist to prevail, one way or another. There's a compelling urge by the reader to find out what happens next. That's the basic operative paradigm of any thriller. What happens next? What's going to make you turn the page or go on to the next chapter? Many thrillers have been described as pulse-pounding reads, which it's a phrase that's become something of a cliche over the years, but it tends to be true. The most urgent question, again, is what happens next, and a thriller can be basically defined as the fiction of mortal events that stress the protagonist to the extremes of human experience. Now, there are different types of thrillers. Thriller is a genre of fiction. There are subgenres. There are domestic thrillers, such as in Gone Girl. There are noir thrillers. There are legal thrillers, medical thrillers, international thrillers or geopolitical thrillers. There are suburban thrillers, which are exemplified by Harlan Coben. He writes them beautifully. There are high-tech thrillers. There are financial thrillers, psychological thrillers, military thrillers, serial killer thrillers. If you've ever read any book by Joe Nesbo, these are serial killer thrillers. This is what he specializes in. Lisa Gardner specializes in psychological thrillers. Tom Clancy, military thrillers. Tom Clancy's books usually run about 700 or 800 pages, and when you're doing research, you want to avoid what's known as the Clancy effect. The bestseller list is often dominated by thriller fiction. Many thrillers have been successfully adapted to the screen. Think of the movies Gone Girl, The Day of the Jackal, The Bourne Identity, The Hunger Games, The Godfather, Silence of the Lambs, and many others. The ease with which thrillers are adapted to the screen and become part of the popular culture has lent them a certain caste where they are viewed as lesser works of fiction by the literary establishment. After all, how can something that's so popular have any literary merit? Although if you read a Dennis Lehane novel, especially one like Mystic River, that's as literary as you can ever get. Would we apply the popularity criterion to some of the world's greatest authors? Keeping in mind the definition of thrillers, again, where there's extreme danger to the protagonist, we can see that in their own unique ways, Homer, Virgil, and Shakespeare, at times, wrote their own versions of thrillers. The plays of Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, great Greek tragedians, were unrelenting thrillers. Their books brimmed with danger, fear, and bloodletting, and there was always the question of what's going to happen next. Included in the ranks of thriller writers would be such esteemed authors, at times, not always and not exclusively, esteemed authors such as Robert Louis Stevenson, Victor Hugo, James Fenimore Cooper, Ernest Hemingway, Charles Dickens, Dumas, Defoe, Melville, Hawthorne, Dostoyevsky, Conrad, Tolstoy, and Vonnegut, along with many, many others. Many of their novels, virtually every one of them that I've mentioned of these authors, has had a novel or more turned into a film. For centuries, their writings have been immensely popular and involve bloodletting, along with frightening forays into suspicion, suspense, fear, paranoia, violence, vengeance, guilt, and retribution. There's almost always retribution. In short, as I said before, these esteemed authors wrote their own versions of thrillers. One of the hallmarks of a thriller is that, as a matter of fact, of almost any fiction, but more so in thrillers than any other genre, is that there's a dreadful, disturbing imbalance that occurs fairly early on in the narrative. When I wrote a weekly blog for the Huffington Post, I interviewed, among others, David Mamet. He was quite adamant in describing thrillers and said, look, if Hamlet comes home from school and his father said, how were classes? And Hamlet says, oh, school was great, Dad. It's boring. There's no story there. On the other hand, if Hamlet thinks that his uncle killed his father and is sleeping with his mother, then you have a story. It's an imbalance that begs to be rebalanced so that some sort of equilibrium can be restored. Speaking of disturbance, which again is not unique to thrillers but is virtually mandatory for a thriller, all good stories are distressing or disturbing in some way or another. They truck an imbalance and the way things should ordinarily be. No matter how beautifully written or literary a novel may be, it resonates deeply with the reader because the storyline tugs powerfully at something inside us. It upsets, confounds, and presents us with chaos, conflict, and upheaval. If you think of any of the novels that you may have read recently, there's some sort of disturbing imbalance that is central to the novel and what makes you keep reading. The upheaval can be in the character's mind or in the protagonist's circumstances in relation to events and to other people. The plot line has pulling power because it creates that imbalance, and our own survival instincts drive us to the tale's conclusion as we hope some reasonable kind of equanimity can be restored. I'm sure we've all had the experience of reading a novel and the protagonist does something stupid and you say, oh God, no, because you're relating to what you're identifying with and relating to the dilemma that protagonist is facing. We crave instability even though we may not realize it. We crave disturbance and uncertainty because these factors make us care about the character, they make us identify with the character, and they make us want to reach the outcome of the story. In fact, chaos and disturbance are the essence of the story. We live vicariously through the anguish, turmoil, and trouble the characters endure in their quest to reorder the imbalance that has taken place. I think this holds true for any form of storytelling, no matter how the tale is told, whether it's a movie, a play, a short story, a novella, or a novel. As I said before, even novels that aren't mysteries or thrillers usually involve a disturbance or imbalance in the life of the protagonist. Gillian Flynn's Gone Girl, which is a domestic thriller, deals with the mysteries of a dysfunctional marriage and its possibly murderous consequences. We've come to expect that every Stephen King novel will explore the frightening possibilities raised by the paranormal or by unexpected events. His readers relish the paranormal ride on which he takes them. When he isn't writing about the supernatural, he's dealing with realistic danger such as in The Shawshank Redemption. Most people aren't aware that The Shawshank Redemption as a movie was taken from a very short novella written by Stephen King. As a matter of fact, The Shawshank Redemption, the year it came out, was nominated for 7 Academy Awards, including Best Picture of the Year. Again, it resonated deeply with people because of the injustice that was perpetrated upon Andy Dufresne, played very beautifully by Tim Robbins. Then there's Mr. Mercedes, a serial killer thriller penned by Mr. King. John Grisham's legal thrillers always deal with murder and various illegalities and their consequences. And what happens next, what the outcome of a trial may be, what the outcome of an investigation may be, is what keeps us turning the pages. The suspense psychological thriller category by definition brims with terror, imbalance, and disorder. Masters of this genre like David Morrell, Janet Ivanovich, Harlan Coben, Lisa Gardner, Michael Connelly consistently write bestsellers because their novels deliver the chaos and upheaval the reader expects them to do. Classic literature follows the same conflictual design. Think of Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment, tortured by guilt after having murdered an elderly woman with an axe. Consider the disturbing circumstances of Dickens' novels, particularly Oliver Twist, David Copperfield, and others. The same holds true for novels penned by Thomas Hardy, by Rudyard Kipling, and by Robert Louis Stevenson. Again, not all of these will deal with murder, but there's always some kind of disturbing, terrifying imbalance that's occurred in the life of the protagonist. I'm thinking particularly of The Count of Monte Cristo. Again, a man accused of something he didn't do, and ultimately it becomes a revenge novel. Human nature and psychology haven't changed in the need to derive pleasure from fictional disorder so prodigiously produced by thrillers. Recall Homer's Iliad, and above all, the Odyssey. The Odyssey may be the most quintessential thriller ever penned by anybody in the history of the world. Odysseus and his crew are constantly beset, whether it's Scylla and Charybdis, or the Cyclops, or Circe, whomever it may be, in whatever circumstance. There is always danger virtually on every page, and the question is, will he and his crew survive? Obviously, not all of them do. Think of Oedipus, as penned by Sophocles, and other tales of antiquity that involve incest, matricide, patricide, fratricide, kidnapping, vengeance, murder, wars, and every conceivable horror that can beset human beings. Classic children's stories also have the same disturbing thriller-like infrastructure. For sure you remember Pinocchio, Little Red Riding Hood, Jack and the Beanstalk, and many other fairy tales and children's stories. The thematic infrastructure of each of these tales almost always involves danger to the protagonist and the question of what happens next, including what happens to Hansel and Gretel. Whether published last year or passed down from antiquity, most compellingly popular stories have at their core something dark, dangerous, and disturbing. They have that imbalance I've talked about, one that must be righted by the protagonist at the risk of danger to life and limb, which of course is what creates suspense. In other words, many of the most popular works of fiction over the last few thousand years are in essence suspense thrillers. Let me just illustrate this by reading a very abridged part of Downfall, the novel that I wrote. Let me just set it up by saying Rick Shepard is a 34-year-old physician who's on his lunch break. He's very dissatisfied with his practice for reasons that are explicated later in the book. And he gets up and goes to his office on 79th Street between 3rd and Lexington in Manhattan. And there's a private entrance to the office where his group practices. And as he approaches, he sees a crowd of people, police cars, ambulances, everything. And lo and behold, there's a dead body lying on the sidewalk covered by a tarp. Well, there's police tape there, and it's a crime scene, so he can't get to the office. So he goes to the hospital, he takes care of things there, and he goes back to his apartment. And I'll pick up there just reading, again, a very abridged portion of that chapter. At 6 in the evening, Rick is back at the apartment sipping a glass of wine. He waits for the alcohol to flood his brain circuits. When it does, he'll float in that nimbus of indifference he craves. It's earlier than usual for Rick's fiancée, Jackie, to be home from her law office. He tells her about the shooting. Was he a patient? I don't think so. I've been watching the news, but there's no word on the guy's identity. The TV is still on, but the volume is muted. Rick snatches the remote, turns up the volume. Chuck Scarrow begins his 6 o'clock p.m. broadcast. A 33-year-old man now identified as Robert Harper, an elementary school teacher, was shot to death just after 12 noon today on East 79th Street in Manhattan. There's an outside camera shot. East 79th Street between Lex and 3rd, police cars with light bars flashing, an ambulance, a fire truck, and EMT personnel. The medical examiner's van is on the scene. There's a close-up of the private entrance to East Side Medical Associates, the group to which Rick belongs. How awful, Jackie says, and right in front of your office door. The camera switches to an on-site reporter. Huddling against the wind, she says, witnesses reported seeing a man fire 3 shots from a pistol into the victim's back. This is unbelievable, Jackie says, in broad daylight. Sounds like a mob thing. As the reporter talks, a photo of Robert Harper appears. It's a headshot. An electric jolt pierces Rick at the sight of the man's face. Then comes a sense of disbelief. Oh my God, Jackie gasps. Rick, he could have been your twin brother. It's uncanny. Robert Harper looks just like Rick. He was about the same age, mid-30s, had a full head of short blondish hair, a square jaw, and blue eyes. The guy was a dead ringer, a doppelganger. Of course, there are subtle differences, but Jackie's right. There's a brotherly resemblance, if not something more. A quick glance on a busy street and anyone could mistake the poor guy for Rick Shepard. Dread washes over Rick. I'm looking at a picture of myself. Rick, that man could be your double. My double's dead. The pores on Rick's face open. Sweat varnishes his cheeks. Jackie turns to Rick with widened eyes. Rick, a man who could have been your twin was killed in front of your office. She reaches for him with shaking hands. During the 2 years they've been living together, he's never seen her this distressed. Wrapping his arms around her, he feels her trembling. Am I in someone's crosshairs? If I am, why? What's going on? His heartbeat throbs in his wrists. Who wants me dead? That's all I have to say. I think I've given you a little bit of of a roadmap about thrillers and mysteries, more so thrillers than mysteries. And any comments, questions, anything like that? Oh, I see there's nothing. Oh, yeah, Chris.
Well, I just had the pleasure of reading your book, and I thought it was fantastic. And one of the things I thought was so great about it is never mind the thrills and the chills and the murders and all that. It's just the descriptive writing was sensational.
Thank you.
There's a part that you wrote about a funeral that really got to me. I will admit in front of you all, it brought tears to my eyes. So this gentleman is capable of very fine prose on top of all the thrilling architecture that goes inside of it.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks so much. Yes.
Picking up on the descriptive part of the novel, which I just mentioned.
Can you wait 1 second?
Microphone's
We're
coming your
recording
way.
this, so we need to.
I was just saying that to pick up on Chris's thought on the descriptive part of the work that you did. I just finished the novel. I loved it. It was wonderful. The descriptive part that I enjoyed so much as a native New Yorker was the way that you captured particularly Brooklyn. And so I could really identify with it because I knew it so well. But if you were a reader who didn't know it so well, I think that you would have the same identification with it. I think you brought the boroughs to life in a way that resonated enormously with me. It was great.
Thank you. What I'll say in reference to that is that when you're writing, you want to create atmosphere. In a way, you can make a city or a borough or a neighborhood almost like another character. You want to immerse the reader in the environs in which the protagonist or the antagonist, whomever it may be, are operating. And in that way, you want to, without getting too flowery, you want to create the atmosphere. You want to create the matrix in which all of this is going on. And having been a native New Yorker myself, having lived both in Manhattan and in Brooklyn, it was pretty easy for me. I didn't have to do any research at all. Yeah.
Without sharing any secrets,
Just 1 second.
do you outline the entire story first before you write, or does the story evolve as you're writing?
Great question. Let me tell you that there are plotters and pantsers. Plotters outline everything. Pantsers fly by the seat of their pants. I'm a plantser. I don't really outline, but I do create a character and a situation. I start with a basic premise. What if a guy comes to his office and sees a guy dead, and he realizes a couple hours later the guy looks just like him? So you take a situation and then you build a character around it, and I sometimes know exactly where I want to go at the end of the book. And I know where I'm beginning, but I know nothing about the in-between. And in that sense, it evolves. And it evolves in a way that, let's say by page 130, you realize there has been an evolution in the character and in the plot structure. So you have to go back to page 25 and change what you wrote because it's no longer applicable. You've negated it. And so that's really living proof that the novel, in a sense, in a very figurative sense, writes itself. It evolves, and you evolve with it. And then, of course, there's revision, and you may start to revise, and you may take a character out, or you may embellish a character, and so there's a constant evolution. I was at a conference almost 2 weeks ago in Manhattan, and a writers' conference, and I was sitting talking with Joseph Finder, who some of you may know. He's a very well thought of thriller writer. And my topic that I had a panel on was called Revising and Revision. And just for the hell of it, because it was before the panel, about 10 minutes before, I said, how many times do you revise? And he said, well, on my current book right now, I'm on my 9th revision. And that's not unusual. So, and part of that does involve an evolution of what you've written. You start to see, and if you take a few days off, or a week or 2 weeks off, and you start to see that, you know, it doesn't look as good as I thought it was. I have to change this. Yeah.
That begs the question that I suppose all works of art and creativity. When do you stop?
I'm sorry. Art and creativity.
Yeah, you know, when do you think, okay, that's it, the 9th revision or whatever.
When is a novel written? When is it over?
Yeah, when do you feel, okay?
Someone pretty famous, I don't recall who it was, once said that a novel is never finished, it's merely abandoned. I'm now on my 5th or 6th revision of something called A Splendid Death. And only this morning at 5:30, I'm sitting there at the computer and I realize I have to change this. This is terrible. This doesn't fit. And 4 revisions earlier, I thought it was fine. Have I changed? I don't think so. Well, yeah, who knows? Then the other question that I'm often asked is, where do your ideas come from? Where do you get your ideas? I think almost every novelist is asked that question, and I can only parrot what Arthur Miller said when he was asked where he gets his ideas from. He said, if I knew, I'd go there more often. It's true, yeah.
Sorry, I just want to jump in. You were already talking a little bit about what I want to ask you about. But as a writer myself, I'm interested in knowing a little bit more of your writing process. What are your writing habits? Do you write every day? And how do you work through, like, writer's block, if you have it, and things like that? How do you work through that process in the long run?
How do I work every day? I write 9 days a week. A day doesn't go by where I don't, even if it's only for 15 minutes in a given day because of other obligations, I try to write every single day, even if it's just changing a paragraph or two. Today, I had this on my mind, and I was preparing this talk, and I had some other things that were going on, so I really couldn't sit at the computer and do what I wanted to do. But I did change one paragraph, and in a very important and meaningful way. It had to do with someone who was dead and the survivor's thoughts and feelings about that person. And it lent a whole new cast to that character.
Thank you.
I don't know if I answered your question, but I tried.
One more?
Hi. Just more of a comment about first off, I thoroughly enjoyed the book, but just how impressive it is what you are doing and have done. I think everyone probably knows this is not Mark's first career. This is his second career.
It's my 8th.
Yeah, right. And I don't even have to limit it to 2, but just the engagement and commitment that you have is inspirational for us all, and how lucky are we to have you in our community to be able to share
Thank you, Scott.
what you're doing with us. So thank you for what you're doing, Mark.
Thank you. Thanks very much. With that, I'll bid adieu.
I'm Carol Johnson, and as my first official act, I get to close the meeting. So thank you to Mark for his presentation and for his continued support of our library. If you have not read Downfall yet, I highly recommend it. It truly is a page turner. My husband was like, "Are you going to get your face out of that book today or what?" I'm like, "Not until I finish it." So thank you. And Mark will be signing books in the back of the room. Congratulations to Cheryl and to Mike and to Rob. Thank you for your leadership. This meeting is officially over. Please join us. Thank you all, first of all, for joining us and celebrating our 128th year here at Wilton Library, which is a huge accomplishment, I think, in and of itself. We do have some refreshments in the gallery. Please join us there. And if the trustees will please meet me by the fireplace for a very brief meeting. And thank you all again.